Thank you so much, Johan. When I do these kind of like talks in person, I very quickly try and stop the person from reading my bio, and this time I can't. So yeah, thank you for that, Johan, and reminding me where I come from. It's so important for the work that we do. So thank you, everyone, and thanks Cheryl and Kirsten for inviting me to address everybody today. It's environmental education for me is quite an important step as we move to what we believe to be a more sustainable and healthier, and of course, just future for South Africa and future generations. I myself do not have children, but I have a niece and a nephew, and the work that I do is for them, for the community that I grew up in, and for South Africans alike to understand their kind of like place within this world, and their responsibility and their power to like make change. So today I'll focus a little bit on the work that I do at WESA, and particularly looking around educating, advocating, and acting for a healthier, just, and more sustainable future. And South Africa obviously forms a big part of that. So the organization that I work for is called WESA, and I thought I'd just give you like a brief overview of the organization and the history of the organization. We are a 97-year-old, what I like to call youthful and vibrant organization. So WESA is one of the oldest environmental NGOs in South Africa. And the timeline at the bottom, you'll see kind of like have specific key moments for WESA in terms of like what we wanted to become in this space. So in 1926, you had a group of like active citizens, a group of people that wanted to contribute towards preserving nature in South Africa. And that is when this group of like active people, really citizens, just normal South Africans, started this group and said that they wanted to like be part of looking at how do we set up protected areas in South Africa, keeping in mind that that was a very European and colonial way of thinking, putting fences around spaces where people actually lived. Indigenous people in Africa, in South Africa, were then replaced for them to like put these fences around. And actually, the Kruger National Park is a big part of that history. So people were like displaced from their land for the Kruger National Park to be established. And WESA was a part of that, or what I would like to call the old WESA, the WESA that set up and started in 1926. So that was when WESA started, and they were quite successful back in the day because they actually got it right to like be part of like a group of people that proclaimed Kruger National Park in 1926. And you all know today Kruger National Park is one of the most attracted tourist features when people come to South Africa. So with that success, they thought, oh, great, let's keep doing this. Let's put up all of these fences and create these national parks for future generations. But obviously it was a very fortress way of thinking about conservation, with people outside, animals, plants inside. And so in 1931, WESA was then also part of like establishing the Addo Elephant National Park, which is in the Eastern Cape. So they were kind of like very successful in creating these like spaces that they considered to be like nature. And there's obviously a very like contentious history around the proclamation and claiming of these national parks. But then in the late 40s, 1948 to be exact, WESA realized that for South Africa's conservation to be and biodiversity to be considered significant, they needed to like start playing in the international spaces and international agencies. And so WESA then became a founding member of the IUCN, and that really put WESA on the platform of an internationally recognized organization. So there was like another little big moment for WESA in its history as an environmental organization. Then in the 50s, they really kind of like thought about, well, how are we supposed to like conserve this nature that we are putting all of these fences around, if people are just going to like come in and destroy it, whatever the case may be. Like I said, that conservation in that time had a very different philosophy to what it is today. And so with that in mind, WESA then started to like look into environmental education as a way to do conservation in South Africa. And so Twin Streams Education Center was then established. It's in KZN, and that was one of the first environmental education centers in Africa. So you can kind of like see how WESA is like shifting as time moves along. So started out as a very, very like just conservation kind of NGO here in the country, starting national parks. Then they moved to like a more international stance, saying, hey, please recognize us as a conservation NGO internationally. And then in the 50s, they looked at how do we include people in this process of conservation. So a lot of conservation education then started, and I'm calling it conservation education because that was really what it was about. So teaching about plants, teaching about animals, how to protect them. And there was not an element of like sustainability and occupying spaces at that particular point in time. So as we moved along, you know, like education became quite a big focus for WESA, and you can see all the way in that 1976, Mgeni Valley Education Project was started. And today, I think some of you know that Mgeni Valley Education Center and Mgeni Valley Nature Reserve is what we call as WESA's headquarters or WESA's home. So a lot of the teachers, a lot of like students that is now in the environmental education space, they went to Mgeni Valley for training on how to actually become recognized environmental educators in the space. So there was a long history, you know, in the 1989, we also then started another education center in Limpopo called Bush Pigs. So there was like this huge shift towards education. We also then started the Blue Flag program in 2001, which is an international beach accreditation program. But what is significant about that is, and I'll share a couple of the others, there were these 5 European education and tourism programs only operated in Europe. And then South Africa, through WESA, decided that we also wanted to implement those programs in South Africa. So the foundation that runs those programs is called the Foundation for Environmental Education in Europe. But when South Africa joined in 2001, they had to drop the last E. So their acronym was FEE. So Foundation for Environmental Education in Europe. So they had like FEEE. And when South Africa joined, they had to drop the last E, because then these programs not only were just happening in Europe, but they were also happening now in the rest of the world, with South Africa leading through WESA. So WESA was quite instrumental in opening up those programs to other parts of the world outside of Europe. And that's when we then started the Eco Schools program, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about. And it's kind of like now the flagship program for WESA, running hundreds of schools throughout the country. But South Africa made that possible for a lot of other countries. And today, that Eco Schools program is run in over 75 countries in the world, across, I think it's 77 now, across the world. And WESA opened the door for a lot of like the global South countries to be able to like also take that on. A significant part for me and another like step or change for WESA. So remember, we did like lots of like conservation in the beginning. Then we formed part of like international organizations. Then we moved to education. And in 2010, another significant step happened for WESA, where we then became a founding member of the Center for Environmental Rights. So now we focused on social, environmental, and economic rights for people within the biodiversity sector. So that is a quite significant mind shift for an organization that was like at that time, like, you know, over 60, 70 years old. And that is what attracted me to WESA, the kind of like environmental rights component that they were now taking on as an organization. And in 2013, becoming one of the major implementers for the Sandy Groensebenza program, which was set up by National Treasury and the Department of Environment back then, and then obviously Sandy, to like look at how do we get young Black graduates into the conservation space. And that again was a huge attraction for me to an organization like WESA. So you can see the kind of like journey that WESA has gone through. And for me, it's quite important for an organization like WESA to go through all of these specific changes so that they can move with the times. And that is why then in 2017, I joined WESA as a project manager for the Gauteng region. And I guess they pretty quickly saw potential in me. And today, 5 years later, almost 6 years later, I head up an entire program. Nationally, I'm the correspondent for international relationships and partnerships. And I'm also an EXCO member for the organization. So the other thing that makes WESA unique is what we call citizen action. So what sets us apart from other organizations is the fact that we work with. So that work with, for me, is very important from a social and environmental justice point of view. So it's not about WESA going into schools, into communities, into spaces to say, we are coming in to like tell you about the environment, because the people who know best about the environment is probably the people who live there, who experience the changes on a daily basis, who can give you histories of like how things have changed in their community. So for me, it's about how do we work with communities to actually enable citizen action. I have a team of project managers, project coordinators working across the country. And for me, it's about how do we learn together to take action for specific social and environmental issues in that particular space. So citizen action is really, for me, is about how do we look at giving people or letting people recognize the power that they have to change things in their own communities. And so a couple of years ago, maybe like 2.5 years ago, as an organization, we came to a point again where we said, like, let's take a look at what we've achieved over the last 90-something years. Let's look at where South Africa is as a country, and then let's look at where we want to go as we work our way towards WESA turning 100 years old in 2026 coming up. And we looked at what is our new mission going to be? What is our vision going to be? And you can see environmental and social justice is, for us, was the kind of like underpinning, like it's our foundation for everything that we do. And although there's like so many different issues that we can tackle as an organization, for us, it was important to like pick a few thematic areas that we can really, really focus all of our energy into. And for us, that was climate action. Or I don't have to speak about, climate change and its impacts in South Africa and around the world. I'm pretty sure all of you are aware of that. There's alarming rates of biodiversity loss, not just in South Africa, but across the world. And so that was the second thing that we wanted to like contribute towards. So the protection and restoring of biodiversity, and then the reduction of pollution. I have the privilege of being able to like travel across the country. And no matter where I go, pollution is always there. And even if you engage communities and learners at schools across the country, if you ask them what's the biggest environmental problem, they will always say to you, waste, litter, pollution. So for us, it's also an important space that we want to like look at. How do we reduce the production of things, but then also like how do we look at contributing to like how people like reuse, repurpose specific things. So our mission is to work towards a healthy and a sustainable planet, keeping environmental and social justice at the foundation of everything that we do. So I just grabbed a couple of articles, and this is the world today. If you look at news, it's quite a sad story if you open your news tab, either on your phone. I've got lots of like news apps on my phone, and this is the kind of like news we get. Floods and fires destroying certain areas. We've got the cholera outbreak in Hammanskraal a couple of months ago, that is a direct, environmental issue that intersects with a social issue, and how many people, died in that instance. So it's clear to see that environmental challenges have a direct impact on the way we live, on our social well-being, and the other way around. So I'm not going to dwell too much on this, because I don't want us to sit here and talk about all the things that is bad in the world, but talk about the response of the world. So obviously we've got all of these issues, and the development of this, or the creation of the Sustainable Development Goals out of the millennial goals, was one of the most participated process that the world had ever seen. So lots of countries, lots of people on the ground contributing towards what are the goals that we have to set for ourselves as a people on this world. And obviously, I'm pretty sure all of you know the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, but for us at WESA, goal number 4 is what we use to achieve all the other goals. And that's why also then from an education point of view, education for sustainable development has been identified as a key driver in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So, and it explains here on my slide why ESD is so important for the way we think, but also the way we act towards things. And I'll share the presentation with you all so that you can read all of these definitions and kind of the ways that ESD is explained and the ways that ESD should be used when we want to achieve things for example, the Sustainable Development Goals. So out of that, UNESCO kind of recognized out of the ESD process that there are specific competencies that we need to make sure that our education process or our education journey delivers on when children step out of a space where they've had formal education. How do we think in a systems way, anticipatory competencies? And I can share all of these with you. But these are the 8 competencies that have been debated about for quite a while, and then kind of established as these are the things that our leaders today, as well as our leaders tomorrow, need for a world that is quite uncertain at the moment. I'll share all of these ones with you. So for me at WESA, education essentially needs to do 2 things for me. And the education that we do at WESA particularly needs to do 2 things for me. Education cannot happen where knowledge is just gained, but there needs to be a switch from knowledge to action. So education for me needs to lead to action. So empowering people, enabling them to make sure that they can use the acquired knowledge and turn that into skills and turn that into competencies. So how do we get action out of education? How do we get advocacy out of education? And if I go around to high school kids, I think, and some of them get the Constitution, a lot of them don't realize that it is their constitutional right to live in a place, in an environment that's healthy for them. So how do we get people to understand that it is their constitutional right to be able to live in a place where there's no pollution, to be able to live in a place where their water is not contaminated, leading to them getting cholera and some of their family members dying. So that for me is an important part of education. And advocacy and activism, when I talk about those kind of things, a lot of people get a little bit or go into the back foot because they're like, oh, I can't protest. I don't want to protest. I don't want to go into the street and fight for my rights. But that is not the only way to advocate. There's plenty of ways, and there's different shoes that fit us all. And for me, it's also important to unpack what it means to advocate for a healthy planet for yourself. And this is what education for me needs to lead to, and that's what we work on as an organization. Because let's face it, there is a whole new way that young people want to be educated. There's a whole new wave of education happening there's a whole new way that they want to contribute in their own communities. And these are all South African pictures, by the way. All South African young people taking to the streets and holding their leaders accountable to make sure that they have a tomorrow. And that for me is the power of South Africa. Also, if we look at the history of this country, if we look at, you know, the youth uprisings, young people at the forefront of change in this country to like change our democratic dispensation, young people are the ones that will change the face of this climate problem in South Africa and the world for that matter. We've got Vanessa Nakai from Uganda, who's a leading climate activist in the world. And there are so many that are not recognized on the African continent. There's a large focus on like recognizing international, global north climate activists. And my work is looking at how do we also elevate, recognize, and give the young African climate activists the same platform that others are getting and the same recognition that others are getting. So last year was COP 27 in Egypt, and we actually got some of our young climate activists across the country to like come together and write a message, firstly to South African leaders who will be at the COP, and then world leaders who will be at the COP to like give them this specific message. And we had schools and youth participating from across the country, sending in their messages, making short videos. And at the end, this was the message that South African young people sent to COP. So one of our WESA staff members went to COP. We printed it nicely on like a canvas, and someone actually, one of the leaders actually took it. And I think it's in Denmark at the moment. I'm trying to get it back, but we'll see if we can. But this is the kind of like galvanizing approach that we have. Children, youth, young people have the ability to directly speak to world leaders. The only difference is whether they listen or not, but that's okay. We will get there. So looking at how do we get young people to understand their power again in their process of fighting for and working towards a more environmentally just and a healthy future for them. So with all of that said, WESA has designed an ecosystem of work that we do that kind of like spans over an entire community spectrum. So we work with schools, we work with youth, both in and out of school, and we do community projects. And we also do have a program called Eco Campus, which TUT used to be a part of, and I would love to get you guys back on that. But for us, it's very much about how do we move a specific individual from the experience of working within nature, creating things, planting trees, having that connection to nature, to then a point where they make responsible decisions, no matter where they are in their career. And I always say to people, the intention is not to turn people into greenies or tree huggers, but for them to have an understanding of their role as well as their contribution to like a sustainable future moving forward. So I always say, my colleagues say cradle to grave, and I say cradle to gray, because for me, the gray is also important in terms of like older generations teaching or sharing knowledge with younger generations. And so that intergenerational approach to solving problems and that intergenerational approach to looking at how do we creatively like move our community forward in a healthy and sustainable way is very important, because we can learn from the experience of the older generations and use our energy as young people. And when you put those two together, there is nothing that is impossible for us to achieve. So our schools focus, excuse me, our schools focus particularly have 3 programs that we've designed in a way to like really work well together. We've designed it in a way that it can be implemented in early childhood development centers all the way through to universities, because we want to like create this, like, for lack of a better word, pipeline of learning. So everywhere in your learning journey, you should always be able to like have access to environmental learning, to environmental education, and to what we now call education for sustainable development. So our Eco Schools program, like I said, is one of our, it's like our flagship program. And that's really where the introduction to environmental thinking, environmental learning starts, but also like best practices. And I've refrained now from calling it best practices to good practices, because I feel like there's always someone out there that can do something a little bit better. So instead of calling it best practices, let's look at our good practices that we do here, and we can always learn from somewhere else. And that's what the Eco Schools program is about. How do we look at small changes at the learning institution, in the classroom, outside of the classroom? How do we look at being into the space? Because for me, teachers are the multipliers of knowledge. If you are able to like train one teacher to do environmental education in their classroom through the curriculum, that teacher sees hundreds of students every single year coming through, and that multiplication of knowledge is what we actually need for our learners to be ready and prepared when they step into the work field, to understand their impact on the environment. So that's, on the one hand, that's the Eco Schools program. Our Learning About Forest programs is really learning about biodiversity in South Africa. So if I'm a child in Gauteng, what is the natural environment that grows around me here? How do I connect to that? So it's really about connecting. And there's one phrase that I'm constantly reminded of when we do environmental education, and that is that it's not about a connection to nature, but rather the nature of that connection when we make them. When we do these environmental education lessons, when we ask children, when we ask youth to engage with their natural environment, how are we coming to them with that, and how are they connecting to their nature, their environment? It might be urban as well. And how is that connection kind of like built? What is the nature of that connection? And then our Young Reporters for the Environment is my favorite, but if anyone says that, I will deny it. Because here it's really about the skills of like the thinking process of how we solve problems. This program we started in 2018. And just to give you an example of why I like it so much is, again, with the pollution. So we were working with a couple of schools in Gauteng, high schools particularly, and we looked at environmental challenges in their community, and all of them constantly said pollution, pollution, waste, litter everywhere. And I was challenging one of them to like say, okay, so why? Why do you have this litter, this pollution problem in your community? And she started to like think about it, and like she drew like a tree, like a problem tree, and she kind of like tried to like look at the root causes, and she was struggling with that. And then we looked at where is the pollution, what she called hotspots in her community. And then what she realized is whenever a mobile clinic comes into their community, people, normally like the older grandparents, have to go and queue at the mobile clinic to get medicine for free, to then take home for whoever needs the medication. And so that is when the light bulb moment switched on for her. So she was saying, well, it's a social injustice that our community, as big as it is, do not have a clinic where we can go to every single day, where people can be helped with healthcare issues. We have there's an economic, challenge here with people not being able to like go to a pharmacy and purchase painkillers that is readily available. They have to like wait for the mobile clinic to come in. So immediately she identified a social injustice. She identified the socioeconomic circumstances of the community. And those two things, through the mobile clinic coming in, led to an environmental problem. So she was able to like put all of these things together, because when the clinic comes, people queue, they buy food, maguinyas, chips, whatever. After they eat, there's no place for them to discard their waste. And so where does the waste go? And that's the beauty of this program is where you put all of these things together and see where the intersections are, and then you can look at solving the actual root cause of a problem, rather than just like doing cleanups and every week you have to do the same thing. So those are our 3 education programs in the schools that we actively work in across the country. This is just how the Eco Schools program work, and the reason why teachers love this so much is because it's very structured. It gives them a guide in terms of like how to do an action project or how to do a project at school. We follow the project-based learning approach. And the other thing that they really like is that they can actually choose their focus areas, what we call themes. So some of them want to work on climate change. Some of them want to work on marine and coast because maybe they're on the coast. Some of them want to like look at how do we get more involved in our community and the heritage in our community. So they love this program because of the structured nature of it, and there's proper guidelines for them to like move from an undesirable to a desirable state in their school or in their community. And yeah, this is the Young Reporters program, also quite research focused. But the Young Reporters for the Environment program uses media to solve problems. So we use the forms of articles, photo exhibitions, and short videos, firstly to highlight a social issue or an environmental issue, and then basically like following a research approach to solve that problem, and then to disseminate the work that we do. The nice thing about the Young Reporters for the Environment program is also that we have mentors in photography, journalism, and videography that mentors the young people. So we actually have like mentors, for example, from the program 50/50. So these guys come in and they actually like train the young reporters on how to take a photo that tells a story. You know, we work with the Daily Maverick, News 24, IOL to like help the young reporters write stories from a partial point of view, teach them how to like, you know, make sure that the journalism is not biased, who to speak to. And this is that kind of like mentoring process that takes place, and for them to also see kind of like the real opportunities coming out of this program. And then our biodiversity program really focuses on bringing nature back to schools. I'm sure a lot of you know that if you go into schoolyards, sometimes some schools don't have one tree, not one tree on that school, in that schoolyard. And we would like to like bring nature back by planting indigenous plants and trees that lives naturally in that specific area, what we call creating biodiversity gardens, and for that then to become an active classroom for teachers to use in their teaching material. So I just wanted to quickly give you some stats from last year. I'll share the presentation again, but I just wanted to like show the different kinds of projects that we do, you know. There's specific community focused projects, there's specific school focused projects, and there's also projects that run across both. And the other nice thing is that some of the schools can actually make money through the Eco Schools program in particularly waste. So if they like collect their recyclables, they sell them to reputable recycle companies, they can get money back from it. We have specific out-of-school youth programs also, looking at young professionals in the field. So I was mentored throughout my entire early career, and that for me is an important thing that WESA needs to create for young graduates coming into the field. So we take part in programs like Groensebenze and other learnerships to make sure that we give young graduates the experience they need and the guidance that they need. Because if you apply for a job, it always says 2-3 years of experience. But if you don't have these programs, where are you supposed to get that experience in the field? Leadership and resilience, very important. It came out of the COVID-19 pandemic, where young people were also heavily affected by the impact of COVID. And for us, we don't want people who just focus on one part of their lives, you know. We want to like look at how do we become holistic, well human beings that can care for ourselves, our neighbors, and nature. And then advocacy and voice. How do we give young people platforms to amplify their voice and to actively become part of people caring for the earth, which is WESA's slogan. So I'm coming to the end of my presentation, and I just wanted to like share some highlights of some of the work that we've done. So this picture, and I saw that Nomfundo was on the call. This picture is from a school in the Midlands, Shea O'Connor, which the picture at the top, you can see the wetland was, you know, it wasn't in a good state. And that school worked for a couple of years to restore that wetland. Now, can you imagine the pride and joy of learners who were part of that project to like restore a wetland from really on the brink of like a little ecosystem collapse to like making sure that it's a thriving ecosystem now that actually works for the school as well. We focus on a lot of like community projects. So how do we look at youth and community work? So this is a project that we do in Richards Bay, where we have like 20 young people trained, who are interested in agriculture, trained in sustainable agriculture, taking their environment into consideration, and then starting their own businesses out of this project. This is just some of the stats of that project. And that project is actually continuing for the next 2 years. So we really are hoping that these youngsters from Richards Bay can grow their businesses into the local economy there, but also for them to start creating sustainable jobs for people in their community. Obviously, the litter, we've spoken about that, lots of cleanups, but like I say, for us, the cleanup should be the last thing we focus on. We should focus on where is the litter coming from? How do we prevent the litter from getting onto the beach or into these spaces in the first place? Community champions, this is what it's all about for me. How do we get young children, youth, to become the voice for their community social and environmental issues? How do we get them to be able to like tell their stories the way they need to, the way they want to, and the way that serves their community best? And this is obviously also some of the water projects that we've done. Youth development, looking at youth capacity building. Teacher capacity building is a very important thing for us. Without the teachers, our programs won't exist. So there's a large focus also on making sure that we don't leave our teachers behind. And then co-creating projects with communities. That's, for me, that's the biggest thing. How do we come into a community and work with them instead of like working like and thinking we've got all of the solutions ourselves? So that for me is very important. We're co-creating projects with communities because that is when they will become sustainable. And that's my story. So I know that if anybody wants any extra information about our programs or want to volunteer, I did put contact detail there at the bottom. Terry would be happy with all of you for making sure that you get involved in some of the projects and programs that we have. Thanks, Johan. Over to you, and I'm happy to like field some questions. Sorry, I took a little bit longer than expected.
Hi, Cindy Lee.
Hi.
I'd just like to thank you for your very insightful talk. I think it was very interesting to also see you map out the involvement of WESA from the inception of the Kruger National Park to the work he seemed to be doing now of the communities and getting them involved in that. I think it's a thing that comes full circle for me. And I particularly liked what she said, that when we go and do climate work, when we go and talk to people, it's more about looking at the nature of the connection people have with the place and not the connection they have to nature. And I think that stood out for me. So I'd like to say thank you for your time and your insightful presentation. I would like to open the floor for questions. We will start with the class, and if anybody else has questions, they can lift up their virtual hand. They can pop them up in the chat section. And yeah, so Dr. O, we can get questions from the students in the class.
Good morning, Cindy Lee. My name is Tony from T20 University of Technology. I do actually have a question, and my question is primarily based on the Action Citizens. So how do you get to initiate the environmental education within the community? And then what age group do you specifically target? And lastly, how do you get to evaluate your progress on your environmental programs?
Okay, all right. Thank you for those questions. Very important ones, because I know of lots of organizations that struggle to like get going in communities. And I think the first thing is just WESA's track record in working in communities and schools. We work very closely from a school's point of view, with the Department of Education. And a big part of my job is actually to like get funding, raise funds, so that we can take the programs to as many communities and as many schools as possible. So, I mean, by all means, I'm not saying that we reach every single community, and I wish we could. I wish we could go to all the corners of South Africa, but that is heavily funding dependent. And we look very closely in terms of like, sometimes our funding partners determine the area of work, or the geographic area that we need to work in. Sometimes we get to choose it, and then we work quite closely with the Department of Education, but also like looking at where do people like need assistance. So like, for example, Hammanskraal, we worked with AECI, who's one of our funding partners, to like look at what are the kind of like things that we can do in that community when the cholera thing broke out. And they've done a lot of work in Hammanskraal to make sure that we get good quality water to some of the schools in that community. So it also just depends on the opportunities that is available to us in terms of like where we go. And in terms of like how we get citizen actions involved, a lot of it is very hard work, because especially when you go into schools and particularly teachers have already a big load of work that they need to do to get through the curriculum. But for us, it's about how do we make their work easier. So in the last couple of years, over the last 20 years, we've actually created a handbook that we update annually to link it quite tightly to the CAPS curriculum. And that way, it's easier for us to like show teachers, schools, that this is how we can work with you as you try and work through your way through the curriculum. So it's about what we can bring for them. And that's, for me, that's fair. If you come to something, if you bring something to me and it doesn't serve me, I might not be inclined to like do it. But if you bring something that can help me, I might be more inclined to like work with it. And then in terms of communities, it's so the school that is situated in a community, automatically we work with that community. For the community projects that we have, again, it's about the partnerships that we create, but also the need for environmental input, the need for addressing a specific environmental challenge or a social challenge. That's how we select where we go. For me, like some people call me and ask, can we be a part of, like, for example, the Eco Schools program? And I have to remind people that anybody can, any school can join the Eco Schools program. It is free. It is free of charge for schools in South Africa. And so that way we try and create a space where everybody can join, although we might not be able to like get to everyone in wherever they are in the country. And then just in terms of monitoring and evaluating the program, so we've got tools that we do at every project that we do to like look at what is the impact of this project that we are having. And each of the projects have a different tool, but then overall, there's three things that we measure ourselves on as an organization. How have we contributed to climate action in the country? How have we contributed to biodiversity restoration and protection? And how have we contributed to like the reduction of pollution? And those are the three things the three kind of like principles that we always guide ourselves. And we work with different partners to make sure that we accurately measure our impact. And we give a report every single year. So there's different ways. We have an organizational way of like monitoring and evaluating the work that we do. And then we have project and programmatic ways of like measuring our impact.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Hi, Cindy. My name is Mpandeli Puruso. I am from TT, and I've got a question today. How do WESA enable the development of entrepreneurial mindset through the project-based learning?
Yeah, good question. And sometimes I'm for and against that, because I feel like, you know, we've got a huge youth unemployment crisis in South Africa. South Africa is also the most unequal country in the world. That's the stats that came out this year. So the entrepreneurial approach is a formidable one, in that we are trying to get people to create their own jobs and jobs for others, instead of only being a job seeker. My issue with it always is not everybody is an entrepreneur. And if we force people into that route, we might force them into failure. So for me, it's about how do we package specific things for young people to understand where their strengths are. And that's the project that we are doing now in Richards Bay. So that's an entrepreneurial based project where we looked at two things. We looked at youth unemployment and the social environmental issue that was identified in that district was food insecurity. So how do we then use the WESA programs to create a project that will develop 20 young people into entrepreneurs? So for us, it's about the developmental process. It's not just about starting a business and then leaving the person to go and do their business on their own. For me, the important thing is, what are the kind of things that you set up as support for young businesses, especially young people who've never run a business before in their lives? What is the training you give them, and what is the support you give them after the project? So that project in Richards Bay, what I wrote into the project is a startup fund. So they get 2 years of training, 1 year of actually setting up their food gardens, making sure it's sustainable, making sure the yield is enough. The second year of the project is entrepreneurial training, getting in outside people to come in and tell them about their businesses. And then at the end of their development process, each of them will get a startup fund. Because for me, that's what's important. So it's not just about the entrepreneurial training, but the support that they get throughout their journey and beyond, because that's where people fail. Sometimes they get the training and there's no support after that. So I think that for me is the most important right now. Is sure, we can set up these businesses and we can have people, think more entrepreneurial, but what is the process of development for them, and what is the support that we give them all the way through and beyond? Yeah, that's WESA's approach.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning. Nonkululeko, and I have a question about, I wanted to know if WESA has an environmental education center, because you spoke about engaging with school kids. So I wanted to know if the school kids come to you or your center, or you go to their schools and do your work there.
Both. So a lot of our work is going to schools, because one of the most expensive things in environmental education is hiring a bus to get children from one. So we have education centers. We've got 4 education centers, Bushbucks in Limpopo, and then 3 in KZN. But sometimes sometimes it's difficult to get students from where they are to the centers, and so we go to the schools. So there's a combination of both.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Asima Ali Mafunda, and I am a TUT student doing my 2nd year. So my question, I actually have 2. The first question is, how do you evaluate the success of your programs?
So both quantitatively, excuse me, and qualitatively. So from a quantitative point of view, it's how many people will be able to reach in that particular year. And a lot of people like that, they like to see the big numbers. But for me, that is not what is important. The qualitative evaluations are important. So like, let's say, for example, we work with a completely new school. We work with a group of like, let's say 60 to 100 children in that school and teachers. It's important for us to like get an understanding of like where they are at in their environmental knowledge journey. So we do like what we call baseline assessments, not to test them, but to see like what is the kind of like understanding that they currently have about, you know, biodiversity, nature, and the intersections of their everyday lives on that. And then we go through the programs with them, and then those same students, same teachers, at the end of the day, they will do like another, what we call an endline assessment. The important thing for me is that, you know, with environmental education, there's a lot of attitude change or behavior change or practices change that need to happen. And that doesn't happen just in 1 year, you know, so we can't expect someone to like, if they join the program in 2023, by the end of 2023, they are now this like completely, they recycle, they don't use plastic, etc., etc. So it's a journey for me. And that is what I focus on, is individual ways of improvement. So this, and my team is pretty good in making those connections. So from that point of view, the qualitative approach for me is a whole lot important. We also work with universities. Universities come in and they actually like do like research projects in terms of like our impact. So, and that's independent. So then they go. So I would love for one of Cheryl's TUT students to like come and do a research project on one of our projects to see from your point of view how impactful we are. Because at the same time, because WESA is doing this work, WESA will always say we do great work. So we work with universities who can come in and be independent. And actually, there's about 5 studies I know of that universities have done, and independent researchers coming in to like look at the impact of what WESA is doing.
Okay, and then my second question, I don't know if it's very sexist or what, but since you say that you get the communities involved in basically involved in these projects and all of that, from like the parental view, which gender would you like try to involve more? Would you like say, okay, you would involve the mother more as she spends more time with the kids, and you said that you're trying to empower the youths, right? So would you say that you would empower the females, the mothers more than the fathers, as they would actually spend much more time with those kids that you're actually trying to empower?
Honestly, I've never thought of that, because it's not something that we go into a project thinking about, you know. So for us, it's not about whether the mother or the father is involved, but also in the context of South African communities, mostly it's like guardians, aunts, uncles, grandparents also that help with raising the child and where the child is staying, because maybe the parents are in another part of the country working. And that's an interesting question that I haven't thought of, because I think for us it's not something that is important, you know, whether the mother or the father does it. It's just about whether that young person gets the support at home that they need. But yeah, I've never thought of it, so I will ask my team also. Thank you for that question. But yeah, for me, I don't think about it. For me, it's just about the support. But interestingly enough, if I look at the statistics, particularly from a teacher point of view, because that's what we have access to, there are more female teachers involved than male teachers, which, you know, also tells a story. And they also always like talk about Mother Earth and, you know, women connecting more with various things, and hence why. But I can't back that up with any scientific evidence. It is just what I see.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, Asima. May you please just tell the next person to hold on a little bit. I just want to read the question from the chat, then you can continue.
Sure.
We have a comment and a question from Vasco. Vasco says, hello, Cindy. I'm Vasco, environmental educator from ASMOG Association, Quirimba Biosphere Reserve in Mozambique. I really appreciate your presentation. His question goes on to say, I would like to know in a few words what activities were handled to restore the wetland you displayed at the end of the presentation, and how easy or difficult was that?
Thank you for the question, Vasco. We actually got a wetland specialist involved. So all of the activities were scientifically based. I don't have a list of them now, but for us it was very important to get a wetland specialist involved who actually worked with the school. I can find that all of the activities and then share it with Vasco. I don't think he's still on the call. But what I can do, Prudence, is share that with you and you can share with the rest of the team.
Thank you. Silo, you can unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Prudence. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Can go ahead.
Okay, from my side, I don't have any questions. I just want to share my gratitude to Cindy and give a little backstory, a little background story. Like, I was fortunate in 2021 to be one of the stewards for the Blue Flag project, in Western Cape. So, and from the experience that I got, and it I would say it invoked something in me, that made me to be interested into nature conservation. And yeah, and the work that WESA does, to empower the youth, it's my network. Yeah, it's wonderful, like it's wonderful. And yeah, I give thanks. Like, she's one of the people that I look up to, and yeah, thank you, man.
Thanks, Ella. And it's because of people like you. This is the reason why we do what we do. For me, it's very important. I always come back to that with it's so important for us to recognize, and particularly for an organization like WESA, that we are not doing this alone. The people that we work with are probably the most important in anything that we do. So thank you for your testimony, and I will share it with our Blue Flag team.
Thank you.
Dr. O, we can take the questions from the class.
Morning, how are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. My question is, in an earlier question, you said that you have 3 educational centers in KZN. Why have you put so many resources and investment in KZN, and what about the rest of South Africa?
Good question. Yeah, so the kind of start of I spoke about in the early days when WESA was created in 1926. There was a group of people, citizens, that came together, and they were all based in KZN. And so that's kind of it's been what I call the stronghold of WESA. WESA kind of created and grew out of KZN. We have the Mgeni Valley Nature Reserve there in KZN. And the opportunities also then presented itself more frequently in KZN. So one of the centers, because of the work that we do, was donated by Mondi, our Twin Stream Center up in KZN North, close to Mtunzini. Our other education center was then donated by the eThekwini municipality. So I think that is the only reason. It was just where the opportunities were, where WESA's kind of prominence grew quite strongly in the country, because that's where we were situated. We did open an education center in the Northern Cape, in the Katu area, that was sponsored by Anglo America. They've got a couple of big mines in that area. And then we helped them create that center into a nature reserve. So now there's a nature reserve. And we closed that center down. But really, there's no prejudice or specific reason why KZN. It was just where most of the opportunities were and where WESA kind of grew out of.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Good morning, Cindy.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. What a wonderful presentation. And on the behalf of the students, the TUT department, Dr. O, we'd like to say thank you. Thank you so much for a wonderful, amazing presentation. Thank you for educating us. Thank you for educating the youth. And thank you for making a difference.
Thank you so much. You are very welcome. I'm looking towards you all as the TUT students and everybody on the call to like pick up the baton from everybody that has gone before you. So my hope is in you, for all of you to like do the work, all the good work after, you know, for example, me and the teams that I work with now move on or go somewhere else, or who knows. So I'm looking to all of you as the TUT students to pick up the baton from all of us and to run with it. And I will make sure that we create and build a nice, strong foundation for all of you to come and build on further.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. Before I take Kirsten's question, I have a question. Dr. O, do you have something to say?
Yes, I just want to add that, Cindy, your team has been doing world training for me for a number of years. They've been at Umgeni Valley, making your guys go crazy there. And this year they've been doing amazing work. And they've also worked for Bush Pegs as well. So my students have been infiltrating all your EE centers as the years are going. And I'd just like to say thank you for making that difference and being so positive. And I will be seeing you in a few weeks' time at ESA. And we'll be making another, ESA is, WESA is hosting the ESA conference this year. And I'm sure it's going to be a huge, huge success, because I know it's a lot of work that's gone into that. And this weekend, we're holding the Arbor Day celebrations event at Klip Riversberg Nature Reserve, but Mr. Wesson, John Wesson, can't make it. Okay. So I will, at my exhibit, also be talking about WESA. So I will be talking about, because remember we've got 11 schools, so I will be encouraging them to become eco schools. So let's try. I don't think we'll succeed with one of them. I don't hold much hope for that one group, but anyway, we'll try. But thanks. But thank you, Cindy. This was great, and my students learned quite a bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Cindy, I have a question, and then I will take Kirsten's question. I just want to know what the projects you do in Limpopo and KZN is there. Do you use some of the native languages there? Have you seen that makes a difference, or the language of instruction is purely English?
No. What we try and do is wherever we go, we employ people who actually speak the native language there, because it's so important. We can understand English, but even me, English is not my first language. But when we respond, when we engage, our mother tongue is probably the most effective and most important for us. We are also in the process of translating a lot of our resources that we have. And we're on the cusp of launching a new theme called Eco-Lit, which is short for eco-literacy. And that will then be like environmental short stories in different languages, because we recognize that English sometimes is a problem, even for teachers, you know. So, or wherever we go, all the other parts, like for example, Northern Cape, Eastern Cape, KZN, Northwest, Limpopo, KZN, Mpumalanga, we try and bring mother tongue engagement to all of the participants.
Thank you. Kirsten, we can take your question.
Thanks, Prudence. Thanks, Cindy. Your presentation's been fantastic. I've learned so much, and I'm so impressed by the work that WESA is doing. And I think that I could say to my colleagues that if you guys have done all of that in 97 odd years, or whatever it is, imagine what we can do. We're only less than 2 years old, and we can aspire to the amazing work that you guys have done. and a little bit of a similar journey. I think we've gone from beginning with Leadership for Conservation in Africa. Our focus was on biodiversity protection, and we've headed more into, with Share Screen, we've headed very strongly into conservation education. I think through also our new programs on conservation agriculture, where we're looking at sort of a very wide scale impact, we're excited about that, and also on social ecology, which Prudence is also involved in. My question is around your shifting from a local influence to an international influence, and what was that kind of initial step that you took to actually spread your wings to an international arena?
I think it's kind of like it was a dual approach for an organization like WESA to, first of all, be recognized internationally as an organization. And I think that's probably more of the selfish reason. But the other side is then to like look at how do we feed into international conservation trends. So a lot of conservation strategies. South Africa used international strategies to essentially create our own initially. But then for us to be able to like also feed into those international strategies. So the kind of like work that's being done around biodiversity hotspots, etc. South Africa and WESA particularly wanted to position itself as a conservation agency that can contribute to international benchmarks, international studies, and international ways of like looking at conservation from a local point of view. So I think that was the two most important reasons. Now for us back then, I would say, now for us as an organization is we recognize the interconnectedness of when a pin drops somewhere, the ripple effect like has geographical reach. And so for us, it's important to like look at how do WESA get involved in Africa as a space. I think that's for us the biggest thing at the moment. How do we work across? And WESA was just appointed as the chair of the Eco Schools Regional African Network. So how do we build connections on the African continent created by Africans for Africans? So that's important for us to become kind of like what my CEO likes to call a convener of conversations on the continent. So she's actually at the moment in Kigali in Rwanda. There's a big conservation symposium workshop happening there. And we are trying to like look at how can WESA better kind of like look at platforms for other African countries to also contribute to. And particularly within the education space, we have lots of like different networks across the continent that we work with. Yeah.
Super. Thanks, Cindy.
Welcome.
And with that said, it's 11:10 and Cindy has to go in 5 minutes. So if there's no more questions, I would like to thank you one more time, Cindy, for your time, and to thank Dr. O and her class for sitting in. And I'd just like to reiterate something that you said to the students, that there is an open invite to go and do research at WESA. So let's hope some TET students will be bothering you and coming to create some great research. So thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Cindy, for your time. We learned a lot, and if there's any further questions or any further collaborations, you can email Cindy or you can email Share Screen and we'll connect you. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you everyone for listening and for engaging. It was an absolute pleasure to be here today. And I'm more than willing to like come back if you guys need me. So great.